We're here today to mourn the passing of Jacob Segal. May his memory always be a blessing. We've also gathered to comfort his family, going to test the internal amplified hearing tech tools. Marilyn, give me a thumbs up if that's working through your headphones. Okay. Very good. We're here to gather both to honor Jacob and to comfort his family, his wife Marilyn, his children and their families, Micah, Michael, and Paula and Paul, Cindy, and Peter, Harriet and Silas, Alan and Amy, Lila and Sam, his brother-in-law, Bud, his children, Max and Sherry, Marilyn, your sister, Maxine and Stuart, Jim and Eric. And of course, this room is filled because there are so many friends, colleagues, associates, people who worked with Jacob, respected Jacob. I'm grateful for his friendship, for his leadership. The 2nd century sage Ben Sira writes, "We are all destined to die. We share it with all who ever lived and with all who ever will be. Cry for the dead, hide not your grief. Do not restrain your mourning, but do remember that continuing sorrow is worse than death. When the dead are at rest, let their memory be a source of peace and be consoled when the soul departs. Death is better than a life of pain, and eternal rest better than constant sickness. As a drop of water in the sea, as a grain of sand on the shore, are our few days in eternity. The good things in life last for but a short time. A good reputation endures forever. Sometimes we plan and sometimes we plan for. Sometimes we yearn for, and sometimes we wish never came. Sometimes death is a tragedy, and sometimes death is better than a life of constant sickness. The time of death is a complicated time, filled with many emotions and memories, both bitter and sweet. Cantor Sarah will chant Psalm 121, linking Jacob's life with the 3,000-year-old tradition of the people Israel and the eternity of God. As the cantor chants in Hebrew, use this as a settling and meditative moment. Perhaps you'll close your eyes. Perhaps you'll conjure up a memory or an image of Jacob in your mind, and you focus your attention on Jacob and that image in his life and your connection. The psalm is chosen for its final line. God guards your going and your coming. A divine presence that brought Jacob into this world now bring him into the world to come.
מאין יבוא עזרי, בעמדך, עושה שמיים וארץ, הייתם למות רבות, אל ירדו שומרך, הנה לא ירדו ולא יישב Shomer Israel Adonai Shomerecha Adonai Tzilecha Al Yad Yaminecha Yom HaShemesh Lo Yakeka Ve'yareach B'layla Adonai Yishmarcha Miko Yishmor Et Nafshecha Adonai Yishmar Tzeitecha U'Borecha Me'ata Ve'ad Olam.
Marilyn, you'd be willing to come forward.
Not the greater. Okay. I wanted to talk to you today for two reasons. The first is to tell you about my Jacob. If I said the last 5 years were easy, I would be very untruthful. The combination of a stroke leaving physical disabilities, coupled with an Alzheimer's diagnosis, stir in a little COVID, made it quite a stew. Jacob really had every reason to be depressed or angry or difficult. He remained amazingly pleasant and sociable. He still even had that sense of humor. So many of the people in this room helped to keep him upbeat in the face of such adversity. The second reason I wanted to speak today was to thank you. Jacob had wonderful caregivers. Their mutual admiration was noticeable. First Light provided daytime aids. For years, Samantha Bartholomew has taken care of him during the day. Before her, Christina Allen Flores was his weekday companion. Evenings were Nurka Ledesma. That was her job. Thank you to all of you and many others too numerous to name for helping and supporting him. Rotary was so important to him. Jake loved being with all his Salem friends and keeping up to date with what was happening in his adopted city. He really looked forward to Tuesdays. Thanks to all of you who watched over him. Then there are Romeos. For those of you don't know, retired old men eating out. A group of guys who meet every week at Sugarcane and have lunch and discuss current events. Again, a place to socialize and be looked after by everybody. Thank you for being there for him. I have to single out one person in particular, Rich Blazo. Before he got sick himself, he took Jacob out to lunch regularly. Now that he is better, he visited Jacob every day during his brief stay at Devereux House. It doesn't get any more special than that. As I stand here, I hope the time will allow me to remember the first 58 years and put the last into the background. In my mind's eye, to picture Jacob playing tennis instead of schlepping along in his walker. or driving a car instead of being pushed in a wheelchair. I want to remember the unabridged Jacob, the wonderful husband and father, the respected and admired member of the bar, the outstanding member of the community, the only emeritus board member in the 200-year history of Salem State. I'm going to add a couple of ad-lib comments because I'm so blown away by the comments in the last 2 days. Reading them online, getting emails, getting phone calls, the number of people that use the term love, it just shocked me. We loved him. Everybody in my office loved him. He was a favorite of everybody. Today I got added, he was a wonderful boss. And he was. When I thought about it, I think it's close to 20 years since we helped owners of the hotel. And to this day, Jacob would go into the hotel and the employees would run to take care of him or to put a glass of scotch in front of him. So it really was true. Anyway, it was quite a journey for a kid from Warren Street. A ride that took him all the way to the penthouse overlooking Salem Harbor. Rest in peace, my love. You earned it.
Thank you, Marilyn. Jacob's oldest son, Michael.
Yeah, I'm a little tall. A lot of folks here. Thank you. Dad had some big dreams. Dad had some big plans. Dad did not like to waste a lot of time. Dad had a lot to do. When I look at Dad's journey that I had the privilege of being such an integral part of, I find myself picturing young Jake. Specifically Jake in 1960, a year I do not remember well. When 1960 began, he was 22. He was a JD student. He was a bachelor. He was childless. When 1960 ended, none of those were true. His dreams were big for himself. He was a kid from Lynn. His father, Hashaki, worked in the leather factories. He graduated from Lynn English and went to BU on what I called the one strike and you're out plan. Dad did not miss any pitches. He wanted to drive a big lawyer's car, check. He wanted to smoke big lawyer cigars, check. He wanted a house in, let's say, Marblehead, check. But Dad's dreams weren't just about Dad. Dad was a sharer. He was a giver. When he gave his time to the Jewish Community Center or the Science Museum or to Salem State University, they became better places for more people. And when Dad got into that car, when he lit that cigar and pulled out of the driveway, he may have been going places for himself, but he was not trying to leave anybody behind. One of the things when we met, when we spoke yesterday, we kept hearing is to be part of Dad's life is to hear from all sorts of people that Dad touched. And a lot of you are here today. And from different parts. When I lived in Alston, and I was getting used to a place that was a little sketchier than where I grew up in Marblehead, I was driving around in Dad's old Mercury Marquis, which was kind of a strange car to be driving in that particular neighborhood at the time. And apparently the hubcaps had some resale value. And one day they disappeared. This bothered Dad actually more than it bothered me. And he said, go up Commonwealth Avenue to a shop called Ellis the Rim Man. Ask to speak to Ellis and say it. I go in. You're Jake's kid? Oh my God, how's Jake doing? Dad went to high school with Ellis. He saw him at reunions. Reunions were for schmoozing because once you've been to a reunion with Dad, Dad might know where to send you to get some good hubcaps. Got a good deal too. Similarly, a few years prior to that, I was with my friend that many of you remember, Richard Kanoski, blessed memory. And in those days when you were over 18 but under 21, they would give you a thing saying you were allowed to drink at a bar, and we weren't quite old enough, so we didn't have that. But if you were to look at us in the parking lot on our way out, acting kind of silly after an evening of video games, you might be under the impression that we had found a way to get some, And a police officer walks up to me and says, I need to see your license. Now, Dad, without actually laying it out, had given some messages to me over time. And one of them is saying, if you're an American, you have rights, you should stand up for your rights. I said, why? And he said, just give me your license. Dad also gave me another message over time, and the message was, don't be an idiot. So I gave him my license. The officer looks at the license, looks at the car, looks at me and says, your father work on Federal Street? I said, yeah. I said, tell him Officer Sullivan says hello. Dad knew people everywhere, touched their lives. In 1960, in April, Dad ended his bachelor days. Married the Simmons girl from Brooklyn. Why wait until he finished school? He knew he wanted Mom in his life by his side. Why spend time kicking back in a bachelor pad? Dad didn't like to waste time. Dad had a lot to do. In June, Dad got that Juris Doctor. He was 22, about time he had earned himself an advanced degree. In November, Dad cast the first presidential ballot of his life for John Kennedy. Now, with all due respect to the Harrington-Saltonstall special election of 1969, I don't think any ballot was ever cast with more enthusiasm, confidence, hope that he was helping to shape a bigger future. We know Dad was passionate about politics, and he was great behind the scenes. I mean, who else do you call if you need to pull off a fundraiser with Bella Abzug on 4 hours notice? He did that in our house. He had the phone list. He had a good relationship with the catering department at Dave Wong's China Sales, and that made all the difference. Dad even got to be the conduit when Harry Chapin was calling the office and wanted to do a benefit concert for Michael Harrington, I believe I saw over there. Now, Dad got to be the conduit mainly because I had a couple of his records, so Dad was the only one in the office who had actually heard of the guy. So there are some advantages to being a 35-year-old man with a 12-year-old kid. I don't think there are a lot of advantages. That's why none of our generation chose to do such a thing. But he got to schmooze. Then with 3 days left in 1960, I came home. Now, according to family lore, it was in a snowstorm between the first and second days of the bar exam. That's probably not true, but please don't fact check me. It was about 9 months and 17 hours after the wedding. 'Cause why spend time as childless newlyweds? Dad didn't like to waste time. He had a lot to do. And so our family was launched. There would be some changes, additions. Cindy came along just a few years later, and Alan several years after that. There are grandchildren, there are nephews, there's a niece. So, of course, not all dreams come true. Not all plans work out. There are always some gaps, there are some regrets. I never did get the recipe for kebabits minin, you know. But a whole lot of them did. The kid from Lynn who spent his life living big, sharing, making things better for a lot of people. Rest well. Because now you have some time.
And that son who came along a few years later, Alan, Jacob's youngest child.
When you met Dad, the first thing that you noticed after the eyebrows was his voice. Somehow, regardless of how many people were in the room, you could always hear Dad's voice rising above the crowd. I remember on long car trips coming back from New Hampshire on Sunday nights, we'd wait until we were close enough to get the radio reception from Boston so we could listen to Celtics games. And I remember Johnny Most, the legendary Celtics radio announcer, and he was one to ask what the secret was of maintaining his signature raspy voice. And his response, it's easy. Gargle twice a day with sulfur. Dad didn't need that kind of regimen. His voice was honed with decades of scotch and cigars. He enjoyed them both, and many a conversation was struck up with strangers who couldn't help but notice the oversized cigar in his mouth or the glass of Chivas Regal in his hand. As distinctive as it wasn't the sound of Dad's voice that made it special. It was the way he used it. It could be intimidating and disarming, forceful and funny. Regardless of what he was expressing at the moment, it conveyed two things. He understood who he was, and he understood you. So much of Dad's success, be it in business, as a community leader, or as a confidant to friends and family, stems from his understanding of people. In case you didn't know it, Dad was from Lynn, and proud of it. When I was young, we'd rarely go anywhere without running into someone Dad knew. Often, he'd introduce me and say, Alan, this is so-and-so. He's also from Lynn. As we'd walk away, he'd coyly say out of the side of his mouth, I'd like to remind him he's from Lynn, because sometimes I think he forgets it. There's a corollary to this story, and I'm a little reluctant to share it given the times we're in, but for anyone who knew Dad, you know it's true to character. Dad would introduce me by saying, Alan, I'd like you to meet so-and-so. I remember him when he was a Democrat. Believe it or not, there was a time when this area was represented by a Republican in Congress. And one night, Dad found himself sitting next to the congressman at a dinner. And in his typical style, he was good-naturedly giving the congressman a hard time over politics. And the congressman turned to him and said, you know, Jake, I think if I could convince 9 out of 10 people to become Republicans, I know who the one holdout would be. The congressman was probably right. And it's notable that this dinner took place when President George H.W. Bush spoke at Salem State. And it was at a fundraiser for the university that Dad helped to organize. Here's the thing about Dad. He may not have agreed with you, or he would poke fun at your success, but in his mind, that's not what defines you. Well, he had a core set of beliefs and certainly wasn't shy about sharing them. He wouldn't let those types of differences stand in the way of your relationship or impede the work that needed to get done. Ultimately, it's one of the things that made him a great leader. Whatever Dad got involved with, those who saw him in action wanted him to get more involved. And he took this kind of leadership seriously. As a little kid, I was proud to walk down the hall at the Jewish Community Center and see Dad's picture on the wall of past presidents. And I know Dad had an impact during his tenure. For example, he pushed for the JCC to open on Saturdays, much to the chagrin of many local rabbis. But Dad was insistent that a JCC needed to serve the whole Jewish community, including kids from Lynn who might not be able to get there during the week, or those from families with various levels of religious observance. And that providing that service was exactly what distinguished a JCC from a temple or a shul. While Dad certainly embraced being Jewish and supported many Jewish causes over the years, he wasn't the most observant when it came to religious practices. Growing up, we usually came to services only on Rosh Hashanah or on Yom Kippur. For years, we sat actually in this room with the partition open, and we were way in the back of the social hall. And at some point, Dad thought, maybe if we sat up closer, we'd pay more attention. In those days, you had to pay more to sit up front, so Dad made the contribution, and we moved further up. The only seats that were left happened to be in the second row behind the rabbi's family. And Dad quickly found out that being closer doesn't necessarily mean that you pay more attention, though dozing off during the sermon does get you more noticed. Over the years, Dad became a fixture in the Salem business community. Eventually, that led him to his service at Salem State University. First, through the Salem State Foundation, where he served 2 stints as president, during a time when there was a funding crisis for Salem State, along with many other of the state's academic institutions. Then, when Governor Patrick was elected in 2006, Dad was appointed to the university's Board of Trustees, going on to serve as chair of the board. I remember my wife Amy asking him why he wanted to serve as chair of the board. He noted that the university was facing some major challenges, and he saw this as his opportunity to put his skills to work on behalf of the university. Not only did he help the university navigate those challenges, but also got to see the university become the institution it is today. A thriving campus providing opportunities for students that would have been unimaginable in years past. Mom also noted that Dad is the only emeritus trustee of Salem State University. And I'm not sure that Dad would want to see it that way. I think Dad would want to see it as he was the first emeritus trustee of Salem State University. Dad was a very smart and capable lawyer. No doubt that was augmented by a strong support system over his 50+ years of practicing in Salem, most notably Wendy, but also partners like George and Mary, as well as the Ronins and Michael Harrington. But it was his understanding of people that might have been his greatest legal strength. What good is it to be right if it doesn't advance the interest of your client? Legal decisions are often more about business and people than they are about the law. Knowing that is what made Dad a great lawyer. As he did in his professional life, Dad sought ways to give back in any way he could to those around him, especially his family. That extended well beyond his immediate family or even his dear sister Susan, along with her husband Bud. He always prioritized being there for his cousins and extended family. Finally, a word about Mom. There's so much to say here, I can't possibly say it all. Mom and Dad were fiercely devoted to one another. For 63 years, they were at each other's side. As busy as Dad was at work and with outside activities, they had dinner together nearly every night. They traveled the world, played bridge and golf and tennis. And in these last few years, she made sure he had the best quality of life possible as his health declined. For all Dad achieved, I feel great confidence in saying that it would not have been possible without Mom's contributions to his success. Rest easy, Dad. We love you.
Well, just a few tidbits to add. He was not only from Lynn, but his parents were from Lynn as well. So Lynn ran deep in Jacob's life. He graduated Lynn English at the age of 16 and was the second smartest kid that Mrs. Neal ever had. College was possible because he could hitchhike from Lynn to BU and could survive on a hot dog he had for lunch every day. Now, Michael's told you about 1960. I want to tell you about 1959, which made 1960 possible. In January 1959, Richard Tobin was dating a woman at Simmons College, where he bumped into his childhood friend, Marilyn, who was waiting in line to make a phone call at the common phone in the dormitory. Richard gave the dormitory phone number to Jacob and said, "You should call and ask for Marilyn." He asked her out, picked her up, and Marilyn's telling me, we went to a very romantic cocktail lounge. It was in a hotel on Charles Street. They had love seats. I had no problem getting a drink, and neither did he. Jacob was friendly, warm, and funny. I liked him. He liked me. We clicked, fell in love. And in 1960, they got married. They lived in Brookline and DC, New York, Swampscott and Marblehead. Along the way, their children were born. Shammai, a Jewish sage from the first century of the Common Era, teaches to greet everybody with a cheerful face. And Jacob loved to greet everybody. He was outgoing and friendly. He made impressions. Family tells a story that one of the aides was concerned that she was solely responsible for taking Jacob out to dinner one evening. What were they going to talk about? What was going to happen? Before they got into the restaurant, everybody was taking care of the aide because they were already talking to Jacob. And throughout the evening, other people came up and spoke to him, and it made the evening very easy. And that just gives you the sense of the people that he knew. The family couldn't go places without people from AZA. Perhaps Jack Stahl could speak to this. That would recognize Jacob around town. And as it was mentioned earlier, his voice was quite recognizable. One time they were walking in New York City, somebody jogged by, turned around, Jacob Segal? Simply because they'd heard his voice. But I think what stands out to me most about Jacob is equivalent to a story we tell in the Hasidic tradition, that when Rabbi Zusha was on his deathbed, he had uncontrollable tears, and his students came around to comfort him, and they said, Rabbi Zusha, you're as great as Moses. For sure, you're going to get into heaven right away. And Rabbi Zusha wipes the tears and says to his students, I'm not worried about whether I'm as great as Moses. I'm worried that God's going to ask me, why weren't you more like Zusha? And Jacob was Jacob. You've heard about the colorful tales that the family's told, about his love of a scotch and a cigar. He was also known for the flaming Waco. I don't know if it's the Waco or the Wacko. It does matter if there's a K in that word. Where when they were living in DC, they were housed in a building. There were some Navy SEALs across the hall. They had a party, and these tough Navy SEALs challenged each other to do a flaming shot where you would take the shot, and if you were successful, the glass would still be on flame after you had taken the shot. Jacob was good at that. So good that when the other seals refused to do it, he would show every new guest and visitor that he could do that shot, and had to be carried home that night. People knew Jacob, they liked him, he was friendly. He made friends wherever he went. And he, as you've heard, just cared deeply about people, his clients, his community. He was the AZA Aleph Gadol, which I have no idea, Jack Stahl, what that means, but maybe you'll tell me afterwards. I think that is Jewish youth group lingo for president, but I have a feeling it comes with some unique elements of distinction and responsibility. You've heard about him being the president of the Rotary Club of Salem and the Salem State College Foundation. He served on numerous boards in this area and was successful in making sure that the JCC opened on Shabbat. Because of his busy civic life, his youngest son's Alan's first 2 words were 2 meetings. Because every night at dinner, Jacob sat down and would say, I have 2 meetings, and then would go off to those meetings. You've heard about his professional abilities. He had a unique ability to kind of analyze a problem and provide solutions, which, as Alan indicated, took into consideration not only the law, but perhaps more importantly, the business and human implications of whatever decision was being made. He was able to take care of people in that way. He was honest. He would call people, he would call another opposing attorney and say, this is stupid, can't we just figure something out and try to reach a settlement? If a client wanted to pursue a path that he didn't think was going to be the best, he might say, why don't you just go home and think about this and just be sure that that's what you want to do. As a grandfather, he'd pick his children up from school, he'd take them to his office. When they were in their early teens, maybe 12 or 10, he'd take them to meetings that he was having. He'd try to treat them as adults, not always as the young children that they were and probably wanted to be at times. But if he was treating his children as adults, they too acted adult around him. And they scolded him for smoking those cigars. And to prevent him from smoking the cigars, his daughter Harriet would play a game of hide the cigar, which would often lead to calls the following morning of, Harriet, where are my cigars? I can't find them. I know how much you appreciate and love your grandfather, all the grandchildren, and for many of you, then particularly for Harriet, that your sense of social concern and social activism is a direct link to your grandfather. Things have been said already. I know how proud he is of his children, Michael, Cindy, and Alan, how your relationships evolved and grew as you entered into adulthood, how much he appreciated when you had your own opinions, your own vocabulary, your own thoughts, and your own words, how you could have conversations with him, agree with him, or disagree with him. Perhaps he loved most when you disagreed, because then you could have a conversation and debate together. He was proud of you in everything you did. And all of that, as you said, would not be possible without Marilyn. He encouraged you when you wanted to go back to work in an era when other husbands would have felt threatened by their wives working, who might have felt that it would have looked bad upon them, that they couldn't support their wife. He encouraged you. His daughter Cindy said that he was a feminist when there wasn't a term for it. You had a wonderful life together. You traveled the world, Vietnam, South America. You came on the synagogue trip to Cuba. You played golf together, bridge. You had an active social life. You're involved in communal causes, politics. You worked together to improve your community and our country. I love the story that Marilyn says that when John Kerry pulled out of the presidential campaign, Jacob said, there goes my chance at having an American president who knows me by my first name. I know how much as a family you learn from Jacob, the value of friendship, the value of service, the value of family. Jacob was smart, dedicated, outgoing, confident. And we know that most of all, Jacob was Jacob. And then when Jacob arrives in the world to come, God will not ask Jacob, why couldn't he be more like Moses? But God will say, thank God, Jacob, you were Jacob. Jacob, may you rest in peace. You will be missed but never forgotten. Please rise for the El Mole Rachmi prayer.
El Malay Rachel, Shochim Bamerumi, Hamzer Menucha Nechona, Tachat Hanefer במעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הקים המסירים, את נשמת יעקב בן שחנר ושרה, שלח בגן עדן תהא מנוחתו. אסיר בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו. אדוני הוא נחלתו וינוח בשלום ישכבו, ונאמר אמן.
El Mole Rachamim, exalted, compassionate God, grant perfect peace beneath the wings of your presence. Among the holy and the pure, whose radiance is like the heavens, to the soul of Yaakov ben Shachna v'Yat Sarah. May his memory be a blessing and may he rest in paradise. Master of mercy, may he find eternal shelter beneath your sheltering wings, and may his soul be bound up in the bond of life. The Lord of his portion, may he rest in peace, and let us say, Amen. Be seated. Just want to remind folks that we're all different human beings, and therefore each of us has a unique relationship with Jacob. And that if you have stories, memories, and anecdotes, the gift that you can give to each other, and especially to his family, is to ask, can I share a story with you about Jacob? Can you share a story with me? And so if you continue to participate and you're at the visitation at Temple Emmanuel later this afternoon after the burial, or if you come to Cindy's house for Shiva on Thursday night, that's my encouragement, is to ask permission to share a story about Jacob, or to ask if someone would share one of those stories with you. Marilyn, to you and your family, we ask that God of the living and the dead send comfort to you and your family who grieve. Please, God, help them focus on the triumph and joy in Jacob's life. Allow them to meet grief with courage. Allow them to have a giant treasure chest of memories in their hearts, because Jacob has lived and been a part of their lives. Okay.